told you last week, we're going to tell the stories of Jacob and Esau first, and then Joseph and his brothers selling him into Egypt. Okay, so that's going to be the roll of things. Oh, I'm so sorry, Becky, that you can't hear me. Hey, Annie. Hey, Lucy. Good to see you guys. Hey, Bella and Ava. And Brantley and Braxton and Brady. You guys there? Okay, some announcements to get us going. The first Bible story night from last Friday is now posted on my YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, go to 5 Minute Bible Study, type it into YouTube, hit subscribe, and then all my videos from past and live streams currently are on that archive list. I did a little bit of editing to last week's Bible story after it was completed, and so I manipulated voice tones and hopefully made it a little more entertaining if y'all want to go back and watch that. Hopefully the video quality is better here as well tonight, so when I get the recording edited and all after tonight, you'll have a lot better visual, and hopefully the audio comes through. Okay, second announcement is the Bible study from last night, Beating Trials, is now posted on my YouTube channel as well. I do want to give a shout out to my cousin Jonathan Edwards, who I think I did last week, but I want to give another shout out. If you're not, at 11 a.m., Jonathan is doing Facebook Live Bible studies on his account, Pure and Simple Bible. Those are excellent studies, so go check that out. Also, only other one I know that's going on right now from a resource listing is Clint DeFrance's Verse by Verse podcast, which is also good material, so check that out. And then I'm going to be moving our Thursday night Bible study to Wednesdays this coming week. Next on this coming week, Tuesday, I'm probably going to be doing some split interview / Bible study with a brother, Isaac Marino from California. Isaac, if you're watching, I'll try to introduce you guys to who he is. Great guy, pursuing evangelist. And then last announcement is next week we're going to be doing the Exodus for Bible story. And maybe if it doesn't take the full 20-30 minutes, I'll tell a little bit about the wilderness. I had to do a whole lot of work on the technology tonight, if you could see this whole mess. And so I had to, last minute, actually look up the Bible stories about Jacob and Esau and Joseph and his brother, because there's some names in there and stuff I wanted to get right. So hopefully y'all will correct me if I say any wrong names or anything. Make sure that I'm on point. I don't want to mislead any children tonight. Okay, what kids are on before we get started? Hey, Sophie. How are you? It's good to see you, Sophie Smith. Okay, we got lots of watchers. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to back up here and hope that this microphone reaches. And we'll get going. Okay, so a long, long time ago, there was a man named Isaac. And Isaac was the son of Abraham. Now, I think we skipped Abraham. Sorry about that. But anyways, Isaac was an old man, had lots of wrinkles. And he had two sons named Jacob and Esau. And Jacob was a very smooth-skinned man, very soft. And he was a mama's boy. Brantley, I know you're a mama's boy. So Jacob was a lot like you, Brantley. And then Esau,
he was a very rough man with hairy arms, with a deep, gruff voice, and he liked to lift weights and show off his manliness.
And he was a lot more like Eli. Eli, if you're watching. Very manly man. And anyways, they had these two sons, and they both grew up to be men. And one day, Esau, he was a hunter. He would hunt deer with his bow and arrow and maybe his slingshot. And he went out hunting, and he came home, and he was so famished. Oh, he was dying of starvation because he had been on the hunt for so long. And he was about to die. He was so near death that he told Jacob, who was sitting in his, he was sitting in the kitchen. Now, he was a mama's boy. He was a kitchen man. He was cutting up vegetables. He was cooking dinner, and Esau said, "Brother, save me, if you will. I'll give you anything if you'll just give me a bowl of your stew." And Jacob, he's over there rubbing his smooth-skinned face, and he's thinking, what can I get out of my brother Esau? And so he said, "I cut you a deal, Esau. if you will give me your birthright, then I will give you some of my special stew. And Esau says, whatever, I'll give it to you. And so Jacob served him some stew, and he ate it all up. But then he realized he had given his birthright to his brother. That meant that all of their father Isaac's belongings would now go to Jacob, and Esau wouldn't have anything. So you boys that want to have a car whenever you go off to college, basically Esau gave that up, and it's Jacob's. Well, anyways, so Esau is very angry about this, and he will not forget that his brother deceived him like this, cheated him out of his birthright. So years go by. Esau still is a smooth-skinned, baby-faced boy, and Esau's a gruff man. And it comes time that Isaac's on his deathbed. And he tells his son Esau, he says, I want you to go out. I might use his old voice. He's like, oh, Esau, my son, I want you to go out and I want you to get me some game. Kill me a deer and then feed me that special stew that you make. And then I'll bless you, my son. And Esau says, yes, father. And he goes off and he starts hunting for some stew. And Rebekah was their mother's name. That was Isaac's wife. And Rebekah loved her son Jacob more than she loved her son Esau. And she was listening to what Esau was being told by his father. And so she thought of a plan. She was very crafty. And she went over to Esau, or not to Esau, but to Jacob. And she says, Jacob, I want you to come here. Tonight, your father is going to bless Esau, but instead he's going to bless you because we're going to trick him. And Jacob said, Mother, what do you want me to do? And she says, well, you're very smooth-skinned, so I'm going to cook a stew, and I'm going to have you take it to him, but I'm going to take some sheepskins and cover your arms so that when he goes to feel you, he'll feel the skin of Esau, but really it's going to be you. And Jacob said, okay, I guess. So, in just a little bit, Rebekah had whipped up some stew, and she gave it to Joseph, and he walks in to his father, Isaac, and he says, Father. He tries to lower his voice, but he can't quite get as low as Esau, and he says, Father, I brought you some game. And Isaac says, who is that? And he says, it's your son Esau. But it's not Esau. He's lying to him. It's Jacob. And Isaac's so old and blind that he doesn't know who it is. And he says, come here, son, so I can feel your face. Because you sound like Jacob. And so Jacob goes over to his father and he puts his arm up. And Isaac feels the arm. Oh, it sounds like Jacob, but it feels like Esau. And he took some of the stew. And he said, and it tastes like the game of Esau. So he said, come here, my son. And he put his hand on his head and he said, I will bless you, and all of my belongings will go to you. And you will be a great nation, my son, and your enemies shall bow down to you. And so Jacob was blessed by Isaac. And he said, thank you, Father. And he left the room. And in the meantime, as time progressed, just right behind him came Esau in the door. And he burst through the door and he said, Father, I brought you your stew. And Isaac said, who is that? And Esau said, it's your son Esau. I've come out from hunting the game. I've brought you the stew that you asked for. Now bless me. And Isaac says, how can it be? Because I just blessed Esau. And he said, come here, my son. And he felt his arm, and he heard his gruff voice, and he smelled Esau, and he said, I've already given my blessing. And Esau said, my brother Jacob has come in, and he's deceived and taken my birthright again. And he was very angry, and he went out of and he said, Father, please bless me too. And Isaac said, I've already given my blessing away, but certainly I can give you something. And so he blessed him, and he said, you'll be a great nation too, and all that. But it didn't mean anything because the greatest blessing had gone to Jacob. And so Esau is super angry, and he wants to kill Jacob. And he goes out to hunt after Jacob. Well, Rebekah knows that Esau is angry with him, and she goes to Jacob, and she says, Jacob, I want you to leave, and I want you to flee to another land so you can be safe from your brother Esau. And he says, but mother, where shall I go? And she says, I don't want you to go to any of these neighboring nations with these foreign women like your brother Esau. I want you to go to the land of my brother Laban. And I want you to go there and find a wife, and I want you to stay there for a long time and be safe. And so Jacob grabs his knapsack, and he goes on his way to the land of his uncle Laban. And as he's going along, he has to rest. And so that night, he lays down on a path and lays his head on a rock. Have any of you kids ever slept with your head on a rock? It must have been so uncomfortable. And he put his head down to sleep. And as he was sleeping, he had a vision from heaven. And this vision, a great ladder came down from heaven. Oh, and it was a shining light, and angels of God were ascending and descending the ladder. And a voice came out from heaven, and he said,
Jacob, I am the God of your father Abraham and Isaac, and I will give you this land and make you a nation of many descendants, and you shall be a blessing to all the earth. And this angels keep on going up and down this ladder, and finally the dream is over, and Jacob wakes up. And he realizes it was a dream. And he says a blessing, and he puts up that stone that he was sleeping on. He says, I will call this name of this place Bethel, which means the dwelling of God. And he calls it Bethel, and he goes on his way. And he will never forget that dream that night. And he goes to his uncle Laban's ranch. And so when he gets to his uncle Laban's ranch at some point later, he knocks on the door, and Laban opens up, and he has a beautiful family, and he has two daughters. One is named Rachel, and one is named Leah. It says that Rachel was very beautiful to behold, but Leah was, it says, what does it say in the New King James Version? That she was, very soft in the eyes. Basically, she was ugly. She wasn't beautiful, but that doesn't mean she was a bad person. But Jacob saw Rachel, and he was like, ooh la la. And he saw Leah, and he was like, And so he starts working and living for his uncle Laban. And it comes time that he's looking at that lady Rachel, and she's looking at him. And Jacob goes to his uncle Laban. He says, Uncle Laban, I want to marry your daughter Rachel. And Laban, he says, but she's the younger of my two daughters. And certainly it's not right for me to give away the youngest first, so surely please take my daughter Leah instead. And he's looking at Leah, and he's like, Uncle Laban, I would prefer to marry Rachel, if you would please not tell Leah that. And so Laban says, okay, if you'll work for me for 7 years, then I'll give you my daughter Rachel. And so 7 years go by, and he's sweating and working all these 7 years. And finally he does it. And he goes to his Uncle Laban. He says, Uncle Laban, I've done what you asked me to do. Now please give me Rachel as a wife. And so he says, okay. And he gives him a wife, and he thought it was Rachel. But Leah was really the one that was given away in marriage. And her face was covered that night so that Jacob could not see who it was that he was marrying. But then in the morning, he woke up, and it was the soft-eyed Leah. Ugh. And he was so upset, and he went to his uncle Laban. He said, Laban, you've cheated me. I worked for you for 7 years, and you give me Leah instead of Rachel? How can you do this to me? And Laban says, well, hold on. For surely it wasn't right that I should give away my firstborn first. So if you'll do this, and if you'll work for another 7 years, then I'll give you my daughter Rachel as well. And so Jacob, he's frustrated, but he says, okay, I'll work for another 7 years. And so he labors by the sweat of his brow, and he's working for and finally he finishes. He goes to Uncle Laban. He says, Laban, I've done what you asked me to do. Please give me your daughter Rachel as wife. And so Laban does that. And they have kids. They have lots of kids. In fact, Jacob, he has 11 kids. Is that right? He has 11 kids at this point in the story, at least. And anyways, at one point, the flocks of Jacob become so great that the herdsmen of Jacob and Laban can't get along anymore. And in fact, Jacob and Laban are having problems with each other. And they've always had kind of a head-butting relationship, and they don't get along. Now, which one of you boys, Brantley and Brady and Braxton, which one of you guys don't get along very much? I'm guessing that Brady and Brantley, or rather Brady and Braxton don't get along with Brantley as well as the others, huh? So think about Jacob and Laban's herdsmen and all. They're not getting along very well. And anyways, so they decide it's best. Jacob thinks in the middle of the night, I'm going to grab my whole family and we're going to fly the coop. We're going to leave and we're going to go to a different land, back to the land of my father Isaac and Esau. And so they go in the middle of the night. And then Laban wakes up in the middle of the night. He realizes his family's gone. So he goes after Jacob and he catches up with him and he says, what have you done taking my family in the middle of the night and you wouldn't even at least let me say bye to them? And Jacob says, listen, I haven't cheated you all these years. I've lost sleep watching your sheep in the pasture, and now you're coming to me and you're telling me that I've cheated you? I worked for you for 7 extra years for your daughter Rachel, and now you're mad at me? And so they cool off. Let's take a breath. And they finally decide to shake hands on an agreement, and they build an altar and they make a covenant. And Laban says to Jacob, he says, you better not do anything to my daughters. Do you hear me? You better not do anything to my daughters. And Jacob says, I'm not going to mistreat your daughters. But he drew a line in the sand right there. And he says, let this line be a marker that I won't come over this line to you and you won't come over this line to me. And so they shook hands on it and they went on their way. Well, then Jacob has to go and meet his brother Esau. Now, it's been a long time. It's been at least 14 years since Esau was angry and wanted to kill Jacob for stealing his birthright and his blessing. And so Jacob he is so worried. He doesn't want to meet Esau because Esau's going to kill him, he thinks. And so he thinks, what am I going to do? And so I've got to give a big present to Esau to make up for all the deceiving that I did. And so he sends a whole bunch of sheep and herds of goats ahead as a present to Esau. And Esau is on his way with a few hundred men. And Jacob, he thinks about the situation and he hears that there's a few hundred men coming with Esau to meet him, and he's worried that Esau's going to come and cut his throat. Oh, wouldn't you be worried? I'd be worried. And he's sweating and he's fretting. Well, they have to sleep that night before they meet Esau the next day. And that evening, there's a man that comes and meets Jacob under a tree. And Jacob doesn't know who this man is, but it says it was the angel of the Lord. Now, in the Old Testament, many times the angel of the Lord is actually just another name for God coming to visit men. God had come to visit Jacob, and he just looked like a man. And he comes, and you know what? These two get in a wrestling match. They get in a wrestling match, and God, who looks like a man, he's got Jacob by the neck, and they're wrestling, and he throws him on the ground, and he throws him on the ground again, and they're wrestling, and Jacob, he has a hold of this man, and the man has a hold of Jacob, and he says, "Let me give up. give up, Jacob. And Jacob says, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to give up until you bless me. Give me a blessing. Because Jacob, he gets the idea that this isn't an ordinary man. This must be God. This must be God or an angel. And so finally, God was really testing Jacob. He was testing him to see if he was a different man and if he had the grit to be a new kind of man than he was when he stole the birthright and blessing from his brother Esau. And so God says, okay, you've passed the test, and I will bless you, and you shall become a great nation. And he repeats all those things that he told him whenever the ladder came out of heaven, and he put that rock up, and Jacob felt a whole lot better. Because now he could go meet his brother Esau, knowing that God had come in the form of a man and blessed him that night. And so the next day, he had two companies, his wife Leah and her sons, and his wife Rachel and her son. And you know what he did? Because he liked Rachel more than he loved Leah, he held back Rachel and those sons so that they would be safe. And then Jacob, he took Leah and the rest of his sons, and he went to meet Esau with all these flocks as a big gift. There was over 200 goats that he took to give Esau as a gift. And he's still a little nervous. And he goes to Esau and he says, my brother Esau, and he bows down to him and he says, Esau, please forgive me. Please have mercy on me. But you know what? Even though Esau was so angry before, it had been 14 years, and Esau, he thought about it, and he said, Jacob, get up. I'm not mad at you. And he gave him a big hug, and they hugged and they cried, and Esau reluctantly took the gift of the goats and all that, and they hugged again, and they became reunited. That's called forgiveness. So the next time that somebody comes to you, let's see who's watching here. Jude, Isaiah, y'all are watching? Next time that Jude does something to you, Isaiah, and when he feels bad about it and he comes to you and he says, Isaiah, please forgive me. Please forgive me. I want you to forgive him. I don't want you to hold a grudge and be a little boy. Be a man. Be a man. And forgive your brother. That's the thing to do. That's what we need to remember, right? Okay, let's see how long we've been going here. That's the story of Jacob and Esau. I guess we'll go ahead and tell the story of Joseph and his brothers. That's a long one. And actually, the story of Jacob and Esau went longer than I expected. But I guess you guys are going to get a little extra tonight. We have 16 people watching. If anybody will share the link before we start Joseph. And I know that some people are not watching because they don't realize it's on the 5-Minute Bible Study channel and not on my personal channel. And so if you will just share this video link so that other people will be able to find the Bible stories tonight. Okay? Okay. Looks like we got a few new faces here. So let's start Joseph and his brothers. Okay. Back up here a little bit. Joseph and his brothers. Okay. Now Jacob from the last story, he had grown up and his sons had grown up into young men. And he had 12 sons, but at this point in the story, he had just 11 sons. And the youngest one was named Joseph. And Joseph was Jacob's most beloved son. Just like Jacob was Rebekah's most beloved son, right? And so, let's see. Jacob loved Joseph so much that he made him a robe of many colors. And this was a special gift. And all his brothers, they didn't get a robe of special colors. And they got a little envious. Is Corbin watching? What if Katie got a robe of many colors and you didn't get anything, Corbin? You would be envious too. And so they were always making fun of Joseph, mama's boy, favorite of daddy. And one day they were out in the field, and Joseph, he was with his brothers, and he was always, hey, listen to what I had. I had a dream last night. And they're like, oh boy, big dreamer. What did you dream last night, big dreamer? And Joseph said, he said, I was dreaming that we were out in the field and we were tending our sheaves of wheat. And my sheaf rose up and all of your sheaves of wheat bowed down to my sheaf. And they said, why don't you be quiet? You're just trying to boast and show us how much better you are than us and how much more daddy and mommy loves you. And so he said, okay, whatever. And then he had another dream. And he says, guys, listen to what I dreamed tonight. And they said, oh, what'd you dream today, big dreamer? What are you going to tell us today, you big mama's boy? And he said, I was dreaming last night, and the stars and the moon and the sun, they all bowed down to me. And you know what that meant? They understood what it meant. That meant that in this dream, Joseph was saying that in the future, all his brothers and family were going to serve him. And that made them angry, and they said, why don't you be quiet and go back to your mama's boy? And he said, okay. Well, their greed and their envy of Joseph just got worse and worse and worse. And they were all the time thinking, what can we do to get back at Joseph, or bragging all the time? And so one day, Jacob said, I want you to go and I want you to take some food and I want you to go check on your brothers. And so Joseph went out to check on his brothers, and he's wearing his coat of many colors, and he goes. And they see him off in the distance, his brothers do, and they say, it's Joseph. Let's do something. And so they scheme together, and there's a pit over there. And they said, let's kill him. And Reuben says,
Guys, don't kill him. That would be terrible. There's a pit over there. Why don't we just throw him in the pit?
And so they said,
well, it seems a little too reasonable, but okay.
So they take him and they throw him in the pit. And then Reuben goes away, and he's going to try to figure out what they're going to do and be a little more sensible about it. Well, while they're waiting, where's Reuben at, man? Ready to get this over with. They decide, instead of killing Judah's he's the next to the oldest brother, I think. And he sees over there some Midianite traders. They're like gypsies. And these traders are coming along on their way to Egypt. And Judah has a bright idea. And he says, guys, let's take Joseph out of the pit and let's sell him to these traders to Egypt. And we'll make a little money off of it. And our hands will be clean, and we'll be able to go back to Dad and tell him that he was just killed by an animal. And so they all thought about it. Sounds like a good idea. So they took him out of that pit and they sold him for some money. And they took Joseph's coat of many colors and they killed a goat and they dipped that coat in the blood. And they went to their father and they said, Father Jacob, Joseph was torn by a wild beast and we found his coat. And this is all we have left to show for it. And Jacob, he grabbed his coat and he said, oh, my son Jacob, my son, how could this have happened? And he was so distraught. I'm about to cry. I really worked myself up there. And so he didn't actually die. Joseph was sold to Egypt, remember? And so what happens is he gets taken by these Midianite traders and they sell him for some cash to this guy named Potiphar. Potiphar was a wealthy man. He had lots of slaves and lots of land. And Joseph became his slave in his house. But you know what? Joseph was such a strapping young man, had such good jawline, suave hair, and he was so well behaved. He was a good man. And if any of you boys want to learn what's a good man that I want to be like, you want to be like Joseph. He was a really good man. And so Potiphar, he took notice of him. He says, this guy Joseph, he's pretty impressive. I'm going to make him head of my house, and I'll make him head of all my servants. There will be nobody greater in my house besides me over Joseph. And so when Potiphar's off doing all his business, Joseph's managing the house. And you know what? Potiphar had a wife. And some of this stuff I don't know how to tell you because it's not really PG. So I'm just going to have to do my best to give you the G rating here, okay? And so Potiphar had a wife, and she stayed at home while Potiphar's off to work, and Jacob's managing the home and the ranch and everything. And she cast longing eyes at Joseph. He said,
Joseph, why don't you kiss me?
And Joseph says, ew, no, you're my master's wife. I can't do that. And he pushes her away. No. And next day, she comes up to him and she says,
Joseph, kiss me.
and he says, no, I can't do that. You're my master's wife. Get away from me. Blah, blah, no. And finally, one day he's in the house, and Potiphar's not home, and his wife comes up to him, and she grabs him and she says,
Joseph, come lay with me.
and Joseph, he leaves his coat in her hands and he runs out the door. And he runs out naked. And when Potiphar comes home, he says,
What is going on?
and Potiphar's wife has his coat, and she says,
Joseph came up to me and he tried to molest me. And look, his coat's in my hand.
and Potiphar was so angry that he took Joseph and he grabbed him by the shirt and he threw him in the dungeon in Egypt. And so Joseph went to the state penitentiary. No, he's in prison, guys. And so from this point, Joseph, there's not a whole lot of hope for him. He's in the dungeon, but just like always, just like every other time, Jacob, he proves that he's a man of good character, and he wasn't guilty of the crime that he was in there for. He didn't try to molest Potiphar's wife. No, he was a good man. And you know what? Over time, those jailers and all, they take notice of Joseph too. That's a pretty good man right there. He's very upstanding. He's got a good, strong jawline, suave hair, very handsome, broad shoulders. And they say, I'm going to... They give him a little more authority in the prison. And finally, these people start realizing that Joseph has the ability to interpret dreams. And one day, luck strikes, and the chief butler of Pharaoh and the chief baker of Pharaoh, they get thrown into prison with Joseph. And they're both in there with Joseph, and they both have a dream. And they wake up. And Joseph's standing right there, and they said, Joseph, you can tell dreams, can't you? And he says, well, I have a God that can tell dreams, and I pray to that God, and he can tell me what you're dreaming. And so they both come to Joseph, and the chief butler comes to him and he says, Joseph, there was a vine that grew out of the earth, and it had 3 branches, and on those branches were heavy grapes. And those grapes were put in my cup, and the Pharaoh took my cup and he drank of the juice of my grapes. What does this mean? And the chief baker, he says, Joseph, there were several baskets on my head, and they were filled with all sorts of fruit. But then the birds of the air came and they began to peck out all the different fruits from my basket. What does this mean? And so Joseph says, he prays to God and says, oh God of heaven, please give me the understanding and the wisdom to know how to interpret the dreams of the butler and the baker. And he comes to the butler and the baker and he says, this is what it is. Mr. Butler, the 3 branches that were coming off of this vine from the earth were 3 days. And in 3 days, the Pharaoh, he's going to take you and he's going to give you your place back as the chief butler. And you'll be serving the Pharaoh of his drink just as you were before, and testing all his drinks, make sure he doesn't get poisoned. And he comes to the baker and he says, Mr. Baker, it's not good news. In 3 days, you're going to be lifted up, but instead of being restored to your previous position, you're going to be hanged. And you're going to die. And so the butler, he was very happy. It's a great day, man. Yeah, I'm getting restored to my office. Yeah, man, thanks, Joseph. You're a pretty cool guy, man. I like you. And Joseph says, Mr. Butler, don't forget me. Don't forget about what I did for you and that I'm in the prison here with you. And the butler said, no, man, I'm not going to forget you. You're cool, man. And the baker, he's so depressed, man. He's popping anti-anxiety pills that night, and he can't get any sleep for 3 days. And in 3 days, what do you know? It's true. The butler's taken from his position, and he's restored to his previous position, giving the king his wine. And then the baker, he's taken, and what do you know? He's killed, man. But the Mr. Butler, he forgot Joseph. And you know, the one that was saying, man, you cool. No, he forgot Joseph. Guys, I want you to remember, when somebody does something good for you, don't forget that they did that for you. Always repay that person with respect and try to do something good for you. Go out of your way to make somebody's day a little bit better, especially the people that have really treated you well. Okay, so time goes on, and over the course of time, Pharaoh, he has a dream. Lots of dreams in this story. And Pharaoh has a dream. Oh, man, it's a nightmare. Oh, man. Oh. And he wakes up, and he calls for the magicians. He says, bring me all my astrologers and all my magicians and bring them here and tell me what this dream is about. I'm so worried. And so they all come to Joseph. They all come to Pharaoh, and they all say, Mr. Pharaoh, we don't know what your dream means. Pharaoh tells them the dream. He says, I was on the banks of the river, and there were 7 big, fat, and plump cows, and they were feeding on the banks of the river. But then these itty-bitty, shrimpy cows, 7 of them, came and they swallowed the 7 fat cows. And he woke up from that dream, and he said he had another dream, and these 7 big, large sheaves of wheat were on the field. And then these 7 itty-bitty, tiny sheaves of wheat came and they swallowed the big sheaves of wheat. And he woke up and he said, what does this mean? And that butler, he said, oh, Pharaoh, I remember while I was in prison, there was a man named Joseph, and he can tell you the dream. I know because he told me my dream, and it came to pass just like he said. And butler said, find me this man Joseph. And Joseph had been in prison, and his beard was really long, and his hair was not so suave anymore. And they took him and he shaved him up, lit his hair back, brushed his teeth, and he got ready to go see Pharaoh. And he came to Pharaoh and he said, Pharaoh, I have a God in heaven, yes. And he did tell me the butler and the baker's dream, just like they said. And if you'll give me a moment to tell me the dream, and then I'm going to go pray to God, please give me understanding and wisdom to understand the dream of Pharaoh so that I may bring glory to your name, O God. And he told him, he said, let me tell you the meaning of the dream. And so he said, these 7 fat cows, these plump fat cows, these are 7 plentiful years that you're about to experience in the land of Egypt. And he said, but these 7 gaunt cows, they came up and swallowed the 7 fat cows, are 7 years of famine that are going to follow the 7 plentiful years. And so what you need to be doing is you need to be wisely collecting as much produce and stock as you can in these next 7 years before the famine comes. And he said the same thing about these wheat. The 7 big sheaves of wheat that were swallowed by the itsy-bitsy 7 sheaves of wheat. He said those are 7 plentiful years to be followed by 7 famine years. And you need to set somebody over your kingdom who will be able to manage all your affairs so that y'all don't die in the 7 years of famine. And so Pharaoh, he is so impressed with Joseph that he takes the necklace off of his neck and he places it on the neck of Joseph. And he says, there shall be nobody in my kingdom who's over you besides me. You'll be second in command. And you will be able to direct the affairs of the nation of Egypt so that these next 7 years we'll be able to preserve and stock up. And so that's what happens. And he's lifted out of prison, and he's elevated to the right hand of Pharaoh, and he's directing the affairs of the land. 7 years go by. And after the 7 fat cows and the 7 big fat sheaves of wheat, the 7 years after those are gone, famine kicks in, and it's not good. And people begin to starve, and they have to sell everything they own. And then they have to go to Pharaoh, and they say, Pharaoh, please, we don't have anything. if you'll simply give us food to eat and not die, then we'll certainly be your slaves, and you'll own us. And so they do that, and everybody in the whole surrounding country, including Joseph's brothers, they end up coming to Pharaoh to buy grain. Now, they haven't seen Joseph in, well, at least at least 8 years, man. It's probably been like 10 or more years, and they haven't seen Joseph. As far as they know, he's dead, man. And in the meantime, they've had another brother named Benjamin come along. So there's 12 boys now, even though they think Joseph is dead. And they come to Egypt on their camels, and they come to buy grain from Pharaoh. And instead of Pharaoh, they meet this young, strapping lad named Joseph. And he looks like he ain't no regular Egyptian, because he's not an Egyptian. He's a Hebrew boy. And he's not a native Egyptian, but he's speaking Egyptian. And they come to him and they say, Pharaoh, Mr. Pharaoh's assistant, we've come to you to buy grain because we're starving in the land of, I can't remember the name. Somebody help me out here. I can't remember. We're starving in our homeland, and please give us some grain to eat. And he says, you're certainly spies who have come to spy out the land, aren't you? And they said, no, Mr. Pharaoh's assistant, we're not spies coming to spy out. We simply want grain. And they said, there used to be 12 of us, but one of our brothers was killed, and now our youngest brother, he's at home. And Joseph said, who's your youngest brother? And they said, his name is Benjamin. And Joseph says, bring me Benjamin so that I know that you're not lying to me, and I know that you're not a spy, and then I'll believe you. And they said, please, Mr. Pharaoh's assistant, we can't do that, because if we take him away and if something were to happen to him, then our father Jacob would certainly die because of what happened to our other brother Joseph. And Joseph says, I demand that you must bring your brother Benjamin so that I know that you're not a spy, or I'm not going to sell you any grain. And so what he says is, I'm going to keep one of you. And so he took the second oldest, Simeon, and he put him behind bars. And he says, I'm not going to release him to you until you bring your youngest brother Benjamin and prove to me that you're not spies. And so they said, please, Mr. Pharaoh, but they have to go on their way. Simeon's left behind, and the other brothers go back to their father Jacob. And you know what Joseph did? He was testing them the whole time. And he had put all the money that they used to buy their grain, and he put it back into the sacks, the saddlebags of these brothers of his. And so they got home, and they told their father Jacob, they said, Jacob, our father, you're not going to be happy with us, but the man that was Mr. Pharaoh's assistant, he told us that he would not let Simeon go unless we brought our other brother Benjamin. And then they looked in their sacks, and the money that they had thought they gave to Joseph for the grain was back in their sacks, plus some. And they were horrified. And they said, what has happened to us? Some ill fate has become us. And so Jacob says, no, you can't take Benjamin. Benjamin is the only thing I have left in life, and if something happens to him, I'll certainly die. You cannot take him. And Judah spoke up and he said, Father, if we have to go back to the land of Egypt to get more grain, and we will, then certainly we'll all be taken as slaves. Father, you have to give us Benjamin to take back and recover Simeon, our brother, and get more grain. And Jacob, he's sweating and he's crying. And he finally says, okay, take him, but please don't let anything happen to him. And they said, we won't, Father. We won't let anything happen to him. And they go back to Egypt to recover Simeon and get more grain. And so they come back to Mr. Pharaoh's assistant, which is the name I've given to Joseph. They don't know that it's Joseph. And they come back to him and they said, here is our brother Benjamin. And Joseph, he tells his servants, he says, I want you to take the fattest calves that you have, and I want you to slaughter them and make a great feast. I want to have a big feast here. And so he sits all of his 11 brothers down. Simeon's brought out from behind bars, and he's placed there to eat. And he puts a big portion on everybody's plate. But when it comes to Benjamin's plate, he had 3 times the amount that was on the other brother's plate. And when Joseph saw Benjamin, his brother, who he had never seen before, he began to cry inwardly. He wouldn't show it, but inwardly he began to cry and long for his brother Joseph to hug him and to tell him who he was. And he had to go and escape and go to his chamber. And he had to act like there was nothing wrong and come out and come down and eat. And so he gave them grain to take back to their land. But what he did is, again, he tricked his brothers. And he put all the money back in their knapsack that they had brought to buy the grain. And beyond that, he took his silver cup, the most valuable cup that he owned, and he told one of his servants, he says, I want you to take this cup and I want you to place it in the knapsack of the youngest boy, Benjamin. And so that servant placed that most valuable cup in there. And so when they were going on the way, Joseph, he knew he had tricked him. He got on his horse and they began to ride after his brothers, and they caught up to him and they said, halt! And his brothers are thinking, what? Whoa, what do we do? And he says, you have certainly stolen from me, Joseph says. And they said, oh man, now I know you tried to pull one over us the first time, but you ain't doing that today. Look in our knapsack. We ain't stolen nothing from you. What they didn't know is that in Benjamin's sack was, what was it? Who's watching? I don't know. Isaiah, who was the one that had the silver cup? Benjamin. And he pulled out. Oh. And Joseph said, certainly you are thieves. And he drove them, all of them, back to Egypt. And I can't remember which brother it was. I know what it was. Joseph said that he was going to take the one with the silver cup in his saddlebag, and he was going to take him and put him in prison. That would have killed Jacob. We've already been through this, how much stress this caused Jacob. And so Judah spoke up and he said, Mr. Pharaoh's assistant, please don't take Benjamin. Do anything. Please take my life instead. You can do whatever you want to me, but don't take Benjamin. And you know what Joseph was doing this whole time? He was testing his brothers to see if they had actually had a change of heart since way back when they tried to kill him. And at that moment in time, Joseph knew that they had repented. And so he took his brothers into his secret chamber, and he uncovered his head, and he stood up, and he said, brothers, it's Joseph. And they looked up at him. Is it really you, Joseph? And he says, yes, my brothers, it is me. And the God of heaven, He protected me, and it was His will that I be brought to Egypt, because He knew that I would be able to save His people in the midst of this famine. And even though you meant it for me for evil, God meant it for good. And they fell down and they hugged His neck, and again, it's a story about forgiveness. And so next time somebody does something bad to you, but they come to you and they repented and they ask your forgiveness and they say, please forgive me. Forgive them. Don't retaliate and say, you did one on me, I'm going to do 2 on you. Don't do that. Forgive them. Little petty quibbles. Don't be a petty quibbler. Don't be a mama's boy. And so he forgave his brothers, and he told him, he said, go back to your homeland where our father Jacob is, and get Jacob and bring all of your families and all of your herds and all your flocks, and bring him, and I'll give you the best land in Egypt. And Joseph told Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said, yes, give him the best land. And so they all got all their belongings, and they moved to Egypt. And that is where we'll end, because that's what we're going to talk about next week, is when the children of Israel were brought out of Egypt through the Exodus. Okay, that's the end of tonight's story. That's Jacob and Esau, and also Joseph and his brothers being sold into Egypt. That was a long one, guys. That was a 40-something minute one. So you got double dose tonight. Some of you kids were asking for some more stories after I was done last week because I only went 20 minutes. So you got 2 times the amount tonight. And these will, again, they'll be edited and they'll be posted onto the website. So if you guys want to watch them again, they'll be there forever, as long as there's bandwidth. So if y'all have any specific requests, I'll eventually, Corbin and Katie wanted to hear about David and Goliath. That's my favorite one to tell. I'm hopefully going to get through those in order, and we'll get to David and Goliath. But if I don't, I'll make sure that the last week that I definitely get to David and Goliath and some of those cool ones like Daniel and so forth. So don't worry. But just remember, final announcements, that on Wednesday night next week at 8 o'clock, we'll be having Bible study on the 5-Minute Bible Study channel as well. We'll be having on next Friday night as well, we'll have more Bible stories, the Exodus and some of the wilderness story. And then finally, don't forget to go to Pure and Simple Bible and check out my cousin Jonathan Edwards' resources, and stay focused, beat those trials, and we'll see you next week.